On July 1st, 1991, an urgent 911 call shattered the peaceful morning in Portland. The caller was Mark Kennedy, who served as both the apartment manager and roommate of J. Andrew Rickbeal, a 40-year-old man. When Rickbeal failed to appear as usual, Kennedy decided to break down the apartment door to check on him. The scene that greeted him left Kennedy utterly horrified. Rickbeal was dead on his bed, with a deep gash around his neck. The body was already cold, indicating the victim had been dead for quite some time. Without hesitation, Kennedy immediately called 911. Recognizing this as a serious crime, Portland police immediately dispatched their most experienced detectives to the scene. Rickbeal's apartment was located on the ground floor of a modest building. The victim was severely disabled, suffering from cerebral palsy and quadriplegia, his daily life completely dependent on a wheelchair. When police entered the room, they found the wheelchair still standing in the corner, but its owner lay motionless on the bed. The cut on the victim's neck had severed the carotid artery, a detail showing the perpetrator had struck with terrifying decisiveness and cruelty. The autopsy results revealed that Mr. Rickbeal had been attacked with a sharp object, most likely a knife, while lying on his bed. Notably, there were no signs of resistance or struggle, which could have been due to the victim being attacked by surprise or simply because his disability prevented him from fighting back. The room was fairly tidy, with all belongings in their normal positions. According to neighbors' accounts, Rickbeal was a simple man who was a New Age believer with a gentle nature and particular faith in people. His habit was to frequently invite strangers to his home to discuss spiritual matters, readily sharing his personal address through business cards, and occasionally providing financial support to those in difficult circumstances. This characteristic made investigators seriously consider the possibility that the perpetrator was one of the strangers he had trustingly welcomed into his home. However, the lengthy investigation yielded no significant clues. The crime scene was completely clean. No suspicious fingerprints, no signs of forced entry, and most importantly, the murder weapon was never found. As a result, J. Rickbeal's death quickly became an unsolved mystery. However, the tragedy was far from over. More than a year later, on July 20th, 1992, another emergency call shocked all of Portland. This time, two grieving fathers, the father of 29-year-old Todd Rudiger and the father of 18-year-old Donna Ferguson, had to witness the most haunting scene of their lives. When they came to visit their children, they discovered that both Todd and Donna were dead in the young couple's mobile home. Both victims bore fatal wounds to their neck area. Even more heartbreaking, Donna showed signs of having endured brutal torture. She had been bound and sexually assaulted in a savage manner. The shock was overwhelming for both fathers, but they remained alert enough to call the police. These two horrific murders, occurring just over a year apart, were both concentrated in the southeast Portland area and shared a chilling similarity. The perpetrator targeted the victims' necks, forcing them to endure their final moments in excruciating pain. Police were once again urgently mobilized to the scene. When they entered Todd and Donna's mobile home, even the most experienced investigators couldn't help but shudder at the level of brutality displayed by the killer. Both young victims had been attacked with multiple stab wounds concentrated in the throat area, similar to J. Andrew Rickbeal's case. Todd's body was found near the entrance, suggesting he may have been attacked first when confronting the perpetrator, while Donna was discovered in the back bedroom. Her hands were tightly bound with rope, and her clothing was disheveled. The subsequent autopsy confirmed that Donna had been sexually assaulted before her death. Items in the house showed signs of disturbance, indicating a brief struggle had occurred, but no valuable property was taken, so it appeared the sole purpose of the killer was to murder and satisfy his sick desires. The fact that both victims were killed, including a healthy young man, suggested the perpetrator was either physically strong or had adequately prepared weapons. The particularly brutal method indicated this could be an extremely dangerous serial killer. Investigators also assessed this as an organized crime scene, with the perpetrator likely acting with calculation, striking quickly and efficiently before leaving immediately. However, like the previous case, the investigation hit a dead end. There were no direct witnesses to the events, no clear clues leading to the perpetrator. Only a biological sample obtained from Donna's body offered hope, but with DNA analysis technology still in its infancy in 1992, this valuable evidence could provide virtually no useful information for the investigation. After witnessing these two shocking massacres, Portland police began to realize a disturbing truth. A serial killer might be hiding in the city, hunting for his next victims under cover of darkness. However, identifying the perpetrator seemed like an impossible challenge. Fortunately, the first ray of hope emerged from breakthrough advances in forensic science. Moving into the mid-1990s, DNA analysis technology was no longer a distant concept, but gradually became a powerful tool in the hands of forensic experts. Recognizing this tremendous potential, the Oregon Crime Laboratory decided to compare the biological sample obtained from the Donna Ferguson case with existing DNA databases. The results surprised everyone. It turned out that the perpetrator's genetic code from the 1992 massacre completely matched DNA from another sexual assault that had occurred 3 years later, in July 1995 in Portland. The victim in this case was Amanda Kopova, an 18-year-old girl who had experienced horror when a stranger broke into her apartment near a Safeway supermarket. The perpetrator had brutally attacked and assaulted her. Fortunately, Amanda fought back fiercely, causing the attacker to panic and flee before he could cause even worse consequences. After the incident, Amanda provided police with a detailed description of the perpetrator, a man who appeared to be under 30 years old, about 5 feet 7 inches tall, with slightly dark skin and distinctive Asian facial features. Police had also promptly collected biological samples from the scene and stored them carefully. When DNA technology became more advanced, the comparison yielded a shocking discovery. The biological sample from Amanda's attack completely matched the sample obtained from Donna Ferguson's body. This meant that the same monster had committed both the 1995 rape and the 1992 murder of the young couple. For the first time in the lengthy investigation, science had helped string together scattered puzzle pieces into a clear picture, opening an entirely new and promising investigative path. At this point, Portland investigators felt both joy that they finally had solid scientific evidence to link the cases, and concern upon realizing that this dangerous criminal was still roaming free beyond the reach of justice. Now, police had to mobilize all resources to track down the mysterious individual behind this DNA profile. However, the 1990s was a time when criminal DNA databases were quite limited, not yet comprehensively built like today. This valuable DNA sample still couldn't lead to a specific identity. Faced with this impasse, investigators had to return to traditional methods, building a list of potential suspects based on criminal records and witness statements, then conducting DNA comparisons case by case. To ensure maximum effectiveness for this crucial investigation, a special task force was established with 2 of the most experienced detectives, Michael and John from Portland Police. They began the meticulous work of reviewing every criminal record in the Portland area from 1990 to 1995, focusing on finding individuals with matching characteristics, males aged 20 to 30, with a history of violence or sexual assault, who had been suspected or arrested for similar behaviors. During this thorough screening process, one name emerged as a notable bright spot on the suspect list. That was Sebastian Shaw, or according to his Vietnamese name, Chow Quang Ho. Shaw became the center of attention not for a single reason, but because of an entire chain of disturbing coincidences. The first thing that drew investigators' attention was Shaw's arrest in 1994 for car theft combined with illegal weapons possession. Portland police had discovered Shaw sleeping inside a stolen 1978 Pontiac Bonneville that had been reported stolen from California. The most alarming detail was the timing of this car theft, late May 1994, which strangely coincided with the time of the murder of 14-year-old Jenny Lynn in Castro Valley, California. In this serious case, Shaw had been identified as the prime suspect. The connection in terms of time and location made it impossible for investigators to ignore. However, what truly made everyone shudder was what was found inside the car. When conducting the search, police discovered a collection of weapons and terrifying tools including handguns, rifles, various sharp knives, duct tape, sterile surgical gloves, rope for binding, plastic bags, and even a ski mask to conceal his face. These weren't simply random items, but a carefully prepared toolkit, perfect for illegal break-ins and committing brutal acts. This toolkit made even the most experienced police officers shiver, as it showed the owner had detailed plans and clear intentions to commit serious crimes. However, due to the complex legal system and lack of direct evidence linking Shaw to specific cases, plus California authorities' refusal to extradite for just car theft, Shaw was released after only 2 weeks in custody. The second factor that made Shaw the prime suspect was the suspicious geographical connection between where he lived, worked, and the crime scenes. After being released from prison in late 1994, Shaw immediately returned to Oregon to start a new life. He applied for a job as an employee at a Safeway supermarket on Hawthorne Boulevard in Portland. Notably, this location was right in the area where a year later, in 1995, Amanda Kopova became the victim of brutal sexual assault. The fact that a man who had once possessed an entire arsenal of weapons and criminal tools appeared right near the scene of another serious crime couldn't be mere coincidence. Moreover, according to Shaw's personal records, in 1991, he had been accused by co-workers of harassment and aggressive behavior at his workplace, leading to his dismissal from the company. The situation became even more serious in 1996 when Shaw was involved in a dispute with his roommate and fired a gun in threat. This incident caused him to face charges of illegal weapons use. These events showed that Shaw had a tendency to resolve conflicts with violence and frequently violated the law. Finally, Shaw's physical appearance also matched suspiciously with the description Amanda Kopova had provided of her attacker. An Asian man, about 5 feet 7 inches tall, aged 27 to 30. All these clues created a convincing enough picture for Michael and John to officially place Sebastian Shaw in the #1 suspect position. However, the experienced investigators understood clearly that no matter how much circumstantial evidence they had, they still needed a decisive factor: Shaw's DNA sample to compare with the biological evidence collected from the crime scenes. Realizing that Shaw would never voluntarily cooperate in providing biological samples, police had to devise a sophisticated plan to collect evidence secretly. This required patience, cleverness, and a bit of luck. February 1998 marked a crucial turning point in the investigation. The Special Task Force began a covert surveillance campaign of Sebastian Shaw, carefully tracking his every move without revealing themselves. Through their intelligence network, they discovered Shaw had a habit of regularly visiting a supermarket in the area. On February 13, 1998, 2 carefully selected detectives disguised themselves perfectly, blended into the crowd, and patiently followed Shaw to the supermarket parking lot. They observed Shaw smoking a cigarette just after stepping out of the store. This was exactly the opportunity the detectives had been waiting for. With intense focus, they quietly waited until Shaw threw the cigarette butt on the ground and left. Immediately, they quickly approached and carefully collected the cigarette filter. This was perfect DNA evidence, as the mucous membrane cells from Shaw's mouth had adhered to the cigarette filter. This sample was immediately sent for analysis, and the results matched completely with the perpetrator's DNA in both the 1992 and 1995 cases. Finally, the identity of the serial killer had been revealed. Sebastian Shaw was indeed the perpetrator police had been hunting for so long. On February 20th, 1998, a massive police force surrounded and arrested Shaw outside a public library in Portland, ending his 7 years of freedom after committing heinous crimes. To better understand the psychology and motives of this killer, we need to return to Sebastian Shaw's early life story. Born on November 28, 1967, in South Vietnam with the birth name Chow Quang Ho, Shaw had to face major upheavals from childhood. When he was not yet 1 year old, Shaw's mother died. His father, due to military service, was frequently absent from the family, leaving the small child in loneliness. In these difficult circumstances, Shaw was largely cared for and raised by distant relatives taking turns, an unstable situation that may have profoundly affected the boy's psychological development. In 1975, Shaw and his father came to America together to seek a new life. The first years in the new country were difficult for father and son. They had to live with a sponsor family, adapt to a completely foreign language, culture, and environment. When Shaw entered adolescence, father and son moved to Woodburn, Oregon, a small town with a fairly large Vietnamese community where they could find familiarity and support in the integration process. Here, Shaw gradually adapted to American culture and lifestyle. During high school, Shaw showed contradictory aspects of his personality. Teachers commented that Shaw was an intelligent student with good learning ability, but also displayed signs of rebellion and being difficult to control. Although he sometimes participated in positive activities like helping with church services, Shaw frequently caused trouble at school through mischievous behavior and failure to follow discipline. The cracks in the family relationship became more serious as Shaw matured. The relationship between father and son, which had never been harmonious, finally erupted into violence in 1985. The altercation between the two men escalated to the point where Shaw had to be hospitalized for injuries inflicted by his own father. After this painful incident, Shaw decided to leave Oregon to seek comfort and stability in California, where his aunt was living. This period may have provided Shaw with a relatively more peaceful environment, at least temporarily escaping the painful memories from home. When he turned 18, Shaw officially became a U.S. citizen, and in 1989, Shaw decided to join the United States Marine Corps. He was deployed to a base in Okinawa, Japan, a completely new and challenging environment. However, military life with its strict requirements for discipline, absolute obedience, and emotional control didn't suit a young man who already carried too much psychological trauma and instability like Shaw. The rigid rules and constant pressure may have made his internal conflicts more severe. After only about a year of service, in 1990, Shaw applied for early discharge. When he returned to Oregon, Shaw was no longer Chow Kwang Ho. This was when the name Sebastian Shaw was formed. In late 1990, Shaw applied to work as a security switchboard operator at Paragon Cable Television Company in Portland. This professional work environment was expected to help him control his negative tendencies and better integrate into the community. However, hopes for positive change were quickly shattered. Less than a year later, Shaw revealed alarming aspects of his personality when he couldn't control his behavior at work. June 1991 marked a crucial turning point when Shirley Phillips, a female coworker, formally accused Shaw of sexual harassment. She said Shaw had acted inappropriately at least twice and had made threats that made her feel unsafe. Paragon Cable immediately suspended Shaw from work to conduct an internal investigation. Shaw couldn't hide his anger at this decision, not recognizing the seriousness of his actions. On July 2, 1991, when Shaw came to the office, he found a formal warning letter on his desk about his harassment behavior. Instead of reflecting on his wrongdoing and seeking to make amends, Shaw exploded in rage. The tense argument with management led to Shaw's immediate dismissal. However, instead of examining his behavior or trying to resolve the issue civilly, Shaw let negative emotions completely control him. That evening, he wandered the streets of Portland with a crazy and dangerous thought: to find someone to kill to vent his anger. Shaw realized that attacking someone he knew would easily lead to discovery, so instead he deliberately sought a completely unknown victim. And tragedy occurred when Shaw encountered Jay Rickbeal, a disabled man. From here, the story became one of the most brutal cases Portland had ever witnessed. Shaw had transformed from a troubled office worker into a cold-blooded killer, ready to take the lives of innocent people to satisfy his rage and sick desires. After arresting Sebastian Shaw in early 1998, police immediately began interrogating this individual. However, they soon realized Shaw wasn't easy to deal with. He appeared coldly calm when locked in the jail cell. Shaw even hummed songs and danced around in a bewildering manner, as if he wasn't worried about the serious charges awaiting him. Investigators who had faced many dangerous criminals also shuddered at Shaw's inhuman attitude. They began building a psychological profile of Shaw, someone with violent tendencies who hated society, with a sick need to control and harm others to satisfy his twisted ego. His selection of random victims showed his motivation leaned more toward the pleasure of taking lives than personal grudges. To strengthen evidence of Shaw's crimes, police conducted a thorough search of his residence and found several suspicious items including a sharp knife, rolls of duct tape, plastic zip ties, and Shaw's diary. Forensic examination showed the knife blade had very faint blood stains, perhaps due to the long time elapsed, but the blood type matched the victim's. The duct tape was also the same type as the piece found on Donna Ferguson's wrist. This physical evidence helped tighten the legal noose around Shaw, and especially, the diary confiscated from Shaw's room revealed the dark corners of his soul. Flipping through the scrawled pages, investigators got goosebumps reading Shaw's confessions from early 1991. "Lately, I've been thinking a lot about taking someone's life." And on another page, he wrote ominously, "My soul is now rotten. I just want to spread that rot to others." These words seem to predict the killing spree Shaw would carry out shortly after. The diary also recorded many fits of anger Shaw experienced at work and in life. Prosecutors later assessed the notebook as strong evidence proving Shaw's premeditated motive and intent to kill. Additionally, police recovered a handgun and 2 rifles from Shaw's car and realized they were stolen goods from a home invasion in San Ramon a few days after Jenny Lynn's murder. This further linked Shaw to multiple federal crimes, including illegal weapons theft. While not directly related to the Portland murders, it showed the scope of violence and criminal range of the subject, convincing the court that Shaw was an extremely dangerous threat to society. During the expanded investigation, police also collected testimonies from people who had contact with Shaw. Shaw's former female co-worker at Paragon Cable said Shaw had an erratic temper and had even threatened to take her life over a very minor disagreement. A roommate who lived with him in 1996 recounted how Shaw once shot out a TV screen and pointed a gun at him in anger just over dishwashing. These testimonies painted a portrait of a violent time bomb over many years. Seeing Shaw wouldn't talk, police deployed the strategy of planting someone to approach Shaw in jail. They arranged for an undercover agent posing as a fellow inmate to share Shaw's cell to extract information. And predictably, Shaw proved quite boastful. He told this cellmate that he had killed a total of 13 people. This confession was later reported to investigators. Although it couldn't be immediately verified, it opened suspicions that Shaw was involved in many other murders yet to be discovered. Simultaneously, Oregon authorities also coordinated with California police to examine whether Shaw was connected to the murder of 14-year-old Jenny Lynn in Castro Valley in 1994. Records showed that when Jenny was killed, Shaw was living in the immediate vicinity of San Ramon, and around that time he was arrested for stealing a car near the crime scene. However, due to lack of DNA evidence or authenticating witnesses, they temporarily couldn't charge Shaw, only considering him the prime suspect in Jenny Lynn's case file. However, with 3 cases already clarified, legal proceedings didn't stop there. Prosecutors determined the nature of the cases warranted prosecution for murder with the highest penalty framework due to multiple aggravating circumstances, such as killing many people and victimizing disabled individuals. The issue was that in 1998, the application of the death penalty in Oregon was still very cautious. Therefore, bringing a case with only indirect DNA evidence to execution wouldn't be easy. So the prosecution's strategy was to separate these cases. In March 1998, a grand jury formally indicted Sebastian Shaw on 2 counts of first-degree murder, 1 count of sexual assault, and 1 count of attempted murder. For Mr. Rickbeel's case, prosecutors weren't rushing to prosecute immediately because they wanted to save it for a separate trial to consider the death penalty. In August 1998, Shaw appeared in court for the first time, but still didn't plead guilty. However, faced with overwhelming DNA evidence, Shaw's defense attorney had to negotiate with prosecutors. As a result, in early 2000, Shaw changed his plea to guilty in the murders of Donna and Todd and the assault case in exchange for not facing the death penalty. In this trial, he received 2 life sentences without parole for the 2 murders plus 35 more years for sexual assault. But after this trial, Shaw remained silent about other cases. Therefore, justice couldn't stop there. Authorities were determined to continue pursuing him in J. Rickbeel's 1991 case to ensure Shaw paid for all the crimes he committed. By 2000, while Shaw was serving life sentences, investigators sought to gather evidence linking Shaw to Mr. Rick Bale's death. They remembered that the 1991 crime scene had collected some blood samples not belonging to the victim, and using the latest DNA sequencing technology, they compared those blood samples with Shaw's blood and got a 100% match. This definitively confirmed that Shaw was present at the scene and had killed Mr. Rick Bale. With new evidence, in December 2000, a grand jury indicted Shaw for an additional count of first-degree murder. Shaw now understood that death was hanging over his head, so he suddenly demanded to negotiate. He declared his willingness to confess to all other murders if guaranteed not to receive the death penalty and to be transferred to federal prison where smoking was allowed, while Oregon prisons prohibited smoking. This brazen offer was flatly rejected by prosecutors. They refused to bargain with the devil and were determined to bring him to trial. In April 2006, the trial of Sebastian Shaw for the murder of Mr. J. Rick Bale took place at the county courthouse, drawing significant public attention because this time prosecutors had decided to pursue the death penalty for Shaw due to the particularly brutal nature of the crime and the victim being a vulnerable person. This could be seen as the final legal battle to determine the fate of this killer. So what was waiting for him at the gallows? Before the jury, prosecutors argued that Sebastian Shaw had murdered Mr. Rick Bale in cold blood just to satisfy his anger, while the victim was a harmless, disabled person who was completely unknown to the defendant. Prosecutors emphasized the extremely cruel nature and high risk of recidivism by the defendant, requesting the death penalty. They argued that Shaw had the opportunity to repent when he received life sentences in 2000. Yet still didn't cooperate in revealing other cases, proving he felt no remorse and remained a potential threat if not permanently eliminated. The prosecution even revealed to the court that they had once offered Shaw a deal not to pursue the death penalty if he would confess everything about other murders he had hinted at committing. However, Shaw refused because he wanted to keep his right to smoke and avoid death. This detail outraged victims' families. One mother called it terrible audacity and hoped the jury would sentence him to death to force him to pay the price. Regarding the defense, Shaw's lawyer didn't deny Shaw's crimes because the evidence was too clear, but presented mitigating arguments. They stated that Shaw had an unhappy childhood, with psychological trauma from war and domestic violence affecting his character. Attorney Wolf also revealed that Shaw had proactively pleaded guilty in 2000 to avoid wasting trial time, implying the client had somewhat cooperated and acknowledged fault, though actually to avoid the death penalty at that time. However, the defense's main strategy was to persuade the jury to choose life imprisonment without parole instead of death, arguing that Oregon hadn't executed anyone in a very long time, and Shaw's lifelong existence in prison was severe enough punishment. They argued that the death penalty would just make Shaw another victim, while life imprisonment would force him to face his sins for life. After more than a week of tense trial proceedings, the jury had to vote on whether to sentence Shaw to death. The results showed a majority of 9 out of 12 members wanted the death penalty, but Oregon law required unanimous agreement of all 12 to impose death, meaning just one abstention was enough to save Shaw. Therefore, the court was forced to sentence Sebastian Shaw to life imprisonment without parole once more instead of death. In total, Shaw received 3 life sentences for 3 lives, plus many more years for sexual assault and other crimes, meaning he would never have the opportunity to return to society again. And that concludes today's case. Thank you for following along, and we'll see you in the next videos.